So which episode is this of our episodes?
Number 15. This is 15.
15? Wow. Do you know what 15 means? 15 is how many drinks I had in celebration of Hemingway and The Sun Also Rises novel. It's how many drinks I had to prepare for this discussion.
I would think Hemingway could probably drink you under the table. That man was a drinker. He indeed was.
Yes, I guess we can table that. I guess in real life he was... I guess the novels that we read are... What did we read? We read 3 novels. You probably read 6, but I only read 3. I read The Old Man and the Sea, For Whom the Bell Tolls. Yeah, you got that?
Check.
And The Sun Also Rises.
Oh, wow. So we get to talk about all of these?
We can. Yeah, exactly. And my sense is there is some reflection of the real world, the real Ernest Hemingway, the man, with these 3 books.
So, Mark, since we last podcasted, you and I have gone to
Olympic National
Forest Park, yes.
We did.
And that was mighty epic.
We did two backpacking trips.
Right.
The first
destination.
The first was the South Coast Trail.
Right.
And that was what? That was 2 nights that we spent, starting at Third Beach, and then walking to Toliak Point, and then coming back and camping on Third Beach. My understanding is that trip was made dramatic not only by the cliffs that we had to go up and down, but also by the tides.
Right. Yeah. Those ropes when you try to get up the cliff, and they were wet and muddy, and then the sand and the rain out on the beach, and it was gorgeous, and it was challenging. It was wonderful, and we had children along who were eager and struggling, and all those different dimensions. It was great. The one thing I think about that part of the trip is you saying, like getting out, doing that kind of wilderness kind of adventure is hard. It's hard at the beginning. You leave the comforts of a home, and you go out and you do that, and it's always at first you got to dig a hole to poop and all that stuff. A cat hole, is that what it's called? And there's those challenges, but then you get into a stride, right? You catch a stride, and then it's so great. It was such a great experience. So
I think it's a bit like holding a mirror to oneself, and it's just it sort of brings out things that in the comforts of our houses we kind of don't have to deal with, and just dealing with food or getting water, it can be a struggle.
Right.
And getting frustrated and okay, come on, everybody, we have to keep going because otherwise the tides are coming and we're going to get swept out to sea. There's real debt.
We lost how many?
Just a couple of kids, yeah. But it's actually...
The children are missing. Splendid.
Yes, dear. But this sort of challenge, it's like exercising your muscles. It's like it's uncomfortable. I'm dirty. I'm sweating. I don't know where all my stuff is. It's somewhere in my backpack. But once you kind of let go and just ease into that life of everything you need as you're carrying on your back, it becomes quite magical. And you realize that everything you have is in your heart and your head.
Right. And the thinking that it propels you to musically. I mean, I had so many musical thoughts and ideas, and then the thinking. Actually, one question I was posing to you when we were out on the beach. I just want to I want to tell you I've thought about it a lot. And it's a question I've been fascinated since I was a kid, which is, are the grains of sand on this beach infinite? And you immediately said, no, they're not. And I've thought more about that. What I was asking, and I think I was kind of more trying to explore, like, what do you call something that's not measurable? And if you say, oh yeah, but you can measure if you know exactly the boundaries. You could measure exactly how many or near exactly. And I think the question that I was posing, because I've been thinking more about this, is like, are there things in life that while they're not infinite, they're not measurable? And there certainly are. And so I don't know, I've just been tripping on that a bit, and that came from that walk on the beach in that gorgeous setting out in Olympic National Park. And it led me to this kind of question about like human emotions. And I've been thinking about that, like, is it possible, is the number of feelings that people have felt throughout human history, is it that infinite? Or is it immeasurable? And, just like it's a massive amount. Is it actual number? All of the feelings people have felt for each other and the desires for things and the passing of their dog or their parent or the birth of a child, and all throughout human history. Is it possible is that an infinite number of things? I know that's it's not. It's kind of an absurd question, but it actually, the grains of sand led me to thinking about that and the massive calculation when you think about human emotion. And
to me, when it calls to mind, your concepts here are analog versus digital. Are there discrete items like a grain of sand? That's like something you could measure. Something like emotion or feelings, I don't know if you can create a boundary around it, because sometimes the feelings are tied to other feelings or thoughts.
Right.
And how do you put a box around, in order to count it, around a feeling? Like, for instance, you feel love towards somebody. Well, that feeling of love may be tied in somehow, and please don't ask me exactly how, because I don't know, with maybe a sense of frustration about that person. Like, gosh, I love them so much and they hurt me, or they hurt themselves.
Right.
Which is often, you see your friend hurting themselves, and that could lead to a frustration. Doesn't mean you don't love them. And so I was thinking about the grains of sand on the world, or a beach or something like that, and definitely grains of sand, unless if you take a snapshot in time and define exactly what a grain of sand is and exactly where the boundary is, then you can actually count, I believe, exactly how many grains of sand there are. But if it's not exactly clear where the boundary is or the size of a grain of sand, then like the sand themselves, those numbers could be shifting. Right.
And how much love has been felt through time from people, and how much, it's merely a thought experiment, but I thought it interesting that our conversation about the grains of sand led me to that, and thinking about just human emotion and how powerful, when you think about that, trying to actually sum it up is a really intense feeling. So,
and speaking of which, I do believe that camping is also intense. The other thing I was going to say, I hope you're not getting frustrated with me in the sense that I was just describing, but the second part of our backpack trip in Olympic National Park, which is just a gem of our national park system, a bit west of Seattle, actually, is we went along for 4 nights the Quinault River, which is the Quinault rainforest is just the most incredible place with these huge ancient trees. Just a beautiful place to go walking, and it's so green there. There's a lot of lichen in the trees and moss everywhere. It's just beautiful shades of green. So we did this after the beach trip. We did this for 4 nights with our relatively young kids. And it's interesting to me that there was different levels of abilities and wants and desires and expectations. And you're out in the wilderness and it's like, wait a minute, we have to go that many miles every day with this heavy pack on? Or wait a minute, I want to get to that glacier. Are you saying we're not going to be able to get to that glacier? And I think you and I, the 2 dads on the trip, we had some very similar experiences, but some different experiences as well, in the sense that my son was raring to get to the top of a glacier that was like, I don't know, 30 miles away. And nobody could keep up with him. My daughter and I couldn't keep up with him. And you and your son did this amazing journey, but it was in a sort of almost a different dimension, at least for a day or 2 of it.
Right. Where we chose to wait and not go further on, and then meet you back at one of the first campsites. And I thought it worked really well to like, hey, groups can decide, let's split up and meet here, and then the kids are like, oh, that's possible, wow, rather than we all have to go together and we're gonna force an issue, and then it turns into like something that's not good for anyone. And then it's just a lesson for life, right? With like group dimension. It turned out to be amazing on all fronts. Like everybody's experience was top notch, and we got together, and then it was, oh my gosh, let me tell you what we did. Let me show you what we did, and let me tell you about this.
It was top notch.
So, yeah,
and that flexibility, yes, that is something that should shed into normal non-backpacking life, because it just was brilliant.
So, and we actually, we got to talk Hemingway, and we did have some Hemingway chat out on the beach. We were pondering Hemingway. I keep thinking about that thing I read about Hemingway, that I don't know if it was with For Whom the Bell Tolls, but every time he'd wake up and he'd begin the book from the beginning and read it to the point that he had stopped writing the day before. So he was totally inside his book. And it shows.
Every word is chosen in that book. There's no mistakes in any of his books.
Yeah, he was definitely, I'm no Hemingway scholar or expert, but just in what I've, as I've read 3 of his books, and you read the same 3 in the past month or 2, and then I watched the documentary by Ken Burns on Hemingway, and I'm excited to read more. But you had said the word masculine when you were talking about him, a month or so ago when we were talking, and this documentary definitely makes that very, if that's the word to use, very, very manly in terms of, if you think about those, the hunting and the drinking and I don't like these things associated as being manly, but he was physically abusive, emotionally abusive with partners, and he was an intense dude.
He was a boxer? No? Was he a boxer?
He was he refereed boxing, and he would box and he was a boxer, and he would like challenge in Cuba. I think he had a standing, I think it was in Cuba, or was it doesn't matter, in Key Largo, or, like standing challenge to anyone who could go 3 rounds with him. He'd pay them, $150, and no one ever did it, or something like that, Right. So he was definitely
and I guess when he went fishing, his marlins were going to be bigger than yours. You know what I mean? Right?
Yeah.
Nudge,
yeah.
poke, poke.
And he, and he served, how many wars he was in the Spanish Civil War, in the First World War. He survived that. He was in a hospital. That's where he met his first wife after and then wrote, what did he write? Farewell to Arms. And, I'm no Hemingway expert. I'm just like, but in my bit that I've been able to, and Farewell to Arms, by the way, was my first Hemingway. I read it in high school, and I need to get back to it because I want to read that one again.
Just a quick clarification. This is more of a question than a comment.
Yeah.
Farewell to arms. Oh, right. That was that about World War One?
Oh man, I'm going to get myself in trouble.
But it wasn't. It wasn't For Whom the Bell Tolls about the Spanish Civil War. So it wasn't
That
about
is Spanish Civil War.
Okay.
Hemingway definitely spoke to me, being like, I'm a lover of Spain. I've been to the running of the bulls twice, and so it was neat. So we read The Sun Also Rises, right? And we read For Whom the Bell Tolls and The Old Man of the Sea. And Sun Also Rises is definitely all about many things, but it has, Pamplona and the running of the bulls, and he definitely is responsible, I think, for making it an international phenomenon. That book came out in the 20s, and
so let me ask you this question, Eric, about that book in particular, or it could be any of the books, but maybe did that book affect you earlier? Did you read that book earlier in life?
Nope.
Okay.
I'd always wanted to read it. I was struck by how different each of these books was. So just as a novice Hemingway reader, I was struck by. I thought Sun Also Rises was, I kind of was, and this is its intent. I think is it's kind of light and moving around all over the place, and there's not like a hardcore plot to it. It's just kind of these different characters, and it's very, and it definitely gave him a huge name. The Sun Also Rises. It's a lot of description and people drinking, and so but it struck me as kind of lighter than For Whom the Bell Tolls, which was written in a totally different time in his life, and which was very much a story with a plot and a problem, and how are we going to solve this, and characters, and very much I love For Whom the Bell Tolls. I really enjoyed reading the book, more than The Sun Also Rises, but they're also so different, it's hard to compare them, but and you?
Well, I found, I think maybe, I'd read Old Man in the Sea a long time ago, and I think the sparseness, the clarity, the crisp sentences, the there's no extra words, actually probably in any of his books. Not to say there's not a lot of repetition in some of his books, but that's intentional. I think there can be quite a bit of repetition in his works, but it's very chiseled, his style. And I think if anything that affected me earlier in my life, it would have been Old Man the Sea, and just the way he wrote. It's just, it reminded me of Strunk and White, elements of style. It looked like he'd read that, or maybe he wrote it. Just not a lot of extra verbiage. He's said to be a writer who would almost like in a boxing match, he would beat out any superfluous words or thoughts or emotion and just have everything crisp and clean, and he'd go back and back again, and back each sentence he would come back to it. And I think that affected me as a writer. In terms of The Sun Also Rises, I think some of that kind of annoyed me. The loosey-goosiness of it, the alcoholism. I guess, it's referred to as the lost generation after World War I, and these people maybe had too much time on their hands. I guess he was that was the point of the book, is to expose.
That's the point, in a sense, right?
So me responding that way would have been, I guess, Hemingway would say, "Yep, that's what I was trying to portray." But there were things that bothered me, like the way the book starts, and there's this Jewish guy who's, clearly Hemingway had it, or he was exposing this gross anti-Semitism. Is like, what the hell is going on there? I did not enjoy that bit, and I didn't enjoy. It was just so much alcohol flowing. It was, to me, it was kind of gross.
Right. And yet like you're saying, it is kind of a document of that time, whether or not you like those things. It's like a document. It's so on the ground documenting the way people were just in that moment. That's what it feels very like real, and it's like, wait, what's going on? Who's with who? And that's exactly what it was. People were drinking so much at the running of the bulls, and they were just drinking all over the place, and like confusion, and then like, and then despair, and then yelling at someone, and then hating this person. It's just like, wow, it's a chaotic documenting of how people were, and this is just post World War One, and so versus, just to go back to the what I was saying about For Whom the Bell Tolls, I loved how like firmly on the ground that book felt to me. Like it was very much like the characters and their names and what they're eating and the coffee that they're drinking and the conflict with this one character, and should we trust him, or should we kill this guy? And then they're talking, and I speaking as a Spanish speaker, I loved, some people don't love this, but I love the way Hemingway like translated directly into English what they were saying to each other. I felt it worked, rather than like trying to make it, soften it for how it would sound in English. He translated it directly, literal translation of what people are saying to each other in Spanish. So like in Spanish, you have usted, which is probably how people were speaking to each other, which is thou, or it's a respectful way of speaking to someone. And it sounds strange in English that they're saying thou, but he was trying to convey that they were saying usted to the other person. And I think, did he say like in Spanish you say something like me cago en la leche, which is like it's obscene, and in the book they would say I obscenity in the milk of the mother, and I obscenity, isn't that what he'd say in the book?
Yes.
It's just fun. It was interesting. So, but I really dug that. And I'll say about For Whom the Bell Tolls, I thought it was interesting that it starts with this problem and this issue that he's going to bomb the bridge. And it was like, oh wait, is this just an initial like conflict point or like part of the plot? And it turned out, no, that was the book. It was just the book. The whole book was about that thing, which was bombing the bridge, and I think in a modern book, often it's kind of like, oh, and here's the plot. And then that's the subplot of this thing. And then like, there's a lot of layers, and this book didn't have a lot of layers. It was just like a story from the beginning to the end, and that's what I really dug about it. Hemingway, I'd say one other thing about in the documentary, they were saying Hemingway's idea about a story is if you take a story to its furthest point, the end of that story is death. I thought it was a really interesting idea. That if you keep the story going, you don't end it here. You can end it here and you can have a happy ending, or you can have it here. But if you keep any story going, the end of the story is death. It's pretty hardcore, isn't it?
It's fascinating.
So, yeah, right.
Yeah, that book had a lot of violence in it, and it should. It's about some violent acts, and it really took you there. I really felt like I was there, and the way Hemingway depicted women in For Whom the Bell Tolls, I thought was interesting. I don't know if he could get away with that these days, the way he depicted Maria.
Right.
And I kind of thought maybe some of the characters were just there acting on Hemingway's own, I don't know, sexual or emotional fantasies, just to have this diminutive, just, yes, I will do your bidding, sir, kind of woman. I think in real life, Hemingway had a number of wives, and maybe he was always looking for Maria and never quite found her. I don't know. It's hard to say.
He caught some flack from the left for having portrayed violence on both sides in that book, and I thought that was near the beginning where the guy tells the story of his town where they would run the fascists through that like bludgeoning line and then run them off the cliff. That was really powerful literature. That was really powerful. And trying to, I guess, as the writer, show that there was ugliness on all sides, and
I remember that exact bit. And what really came through to me with that, the part that you just described, going off the cliffs, and there was some stories that Pilar was saying. And Pilar being one of the female characters in the story. And what came through to me was just what a master storyteller Hemingway is. He just, that whole bit where those digressions in the narrative, where he would just have one of the characters just take over for like 30 pages, or maybe it was 20 pages, and they would just have this whole this is what happened here, and then you get back to the main narrative. But it was so engaging, and so it just swept me up into that. And just whatever you say about Hemingway, maybe he was had a big ego, or he was sort of destructive masculine because he was actually a weak guy and he was trying to make up for it. I mean, people have all kinds of theories about this guy, but whatever it is, the guy could tell a story.
Yeah. Totally. I know. As I was learning more about him, you say, "Oh wow, he was an intense dude, and he was not nice all the time." I mean, that John McCain is interviewed in this documentary powerfully, and not forgiving him his major faults, but saying, he was a human. He was an intense human. And you can't, in some ways, you can't get that intense writing that so many people love without having an intense person on the other side. A guy who went through 4 wives and was always seeking another lover and was drinking like massive amounts of alcohol. And his son writes him this like absolute letter of despising him, and forgave him later on, but certainly an intense person, going off on these like hunts in Africa and killing like lions and elephants and things. I'm just I see that as a modern person. I'm like, God, really? Oof. But I don't know. Do you separate the man from the literature? That's an age-old question about art. But I think maybe you can't have one without the other. You can't have this intense person without getting. You can't have the great book without having. He's not just your average Joe walking down the street with a Fidelity account
or an infidelity account.
Correct.
Which actually you could get pretty good returns if you get, a certain percentage of your 401k into an infidelity account. I highly recommend it. You just do dollar cost averaging. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sounds like a plan, Stan. Hey, about The Old Man and the Sea. I read it with my son when we were in Olympic National Park. As you well know, we started it there and we finished it. And I think, to that book's credit, that's, I couldn't have read the other books with him. He's a 12-year-old, but it really worked to read with my son that book, and it was a really good thing to share. I love that book, and that was the second time I read it. And it was interesting just back to the Ken Burns documentary, they were talking to a famous Spanish author, and who was saying, "Oh, it's his favorite book. Oh my gosh!" And then an English writer, she said, "Oh, it's not really that of his best, probably one of his least good books, or if that's English, but like that it's kind of simplistic, and she was criticizing it. And I just thought it was interesting. There was this wide range, but I think, the public kind of speaks with that book, with Old Man and the Sea. That's definitely that was written as his last big, when he was alive, book that just kind of took the world by storm. Like, go ahead, man. I thought of Tiger Woods, who'd had a real lull in his career and then came back and won the Masters, after a couple years ago, and kind of blew everyone away. And I think people were writing off Hemingway when he wrote which of his books, over
the Green Hills or something of Africa.
One of these. Yeah. And that critics said, oh, it's no good. This is the end of Hemingway. He's had his day. And Hemingway hated critics. He actually caught up with one of the critics a few years after and like ripped the guy's shirt and like screamed at him. And like, Hemingway's an intense guy, and he hated the critics. And I feel his feeling there, And he gets the last laugh, I think, with a book like The Old Man and the Sea.
Some say that the protagonist of that story, Santiago, this old fisherman, is in a sense parallel to Hemingway as the writer, in that at that point when Hemingway was writing that story, he, as you say, Eric, he hadn't had a big book out there, just like the character Santiago had not caught a fish, a big fish, or a fish of importance in its size for feeding himself for, I don't know, like 84 days or something, a long time, something like that. And so there's this parallel in the narrative with his own life as a writer, and the story speaks for itself. He just lands a big one, and I guess the sharks could be likened, who descend on his little boat toward the end, to the critics.
Right. I mean, that's what I think is wonderful about the sharks in this book, is that, and the whole story, but it can mean different things to you based on your place in life. If you're reading it as a child, it's one thing. I think as a person in middle age, it's another. It's a person who's faced sharks all their life is going to hone in on that part. A person who's it's a story of challenge too. Where he goes and he catches the big fish, and I think that's as the book is so simple in that way that you can interpret, I think, and read into it in different ways. But the sharks, I'll tell you, it's after that whole trial of catching the fish, this doesn't give it. It's not a big book. I don't think I'm giving a big secret away. That he catches the big marlin, and then he's all alone, and this marlin is huge, and then he catches it and ties it to the boat, and then all the sharks, as he's going back, all nibble and chomp at it, and then he ends up with nothing after that massive battle. And what lessons do you draw from life about that, especially written by someone like Hemingway, who's in the later years of his life writing this book, and
it could be kind of a grim metaphor for just life itself. You try to do great things, and the energy from that goodness sort of dissipates, and at the end, you kind of die alone. I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying that's one interpretation of life.
Right.
And it's a bit grim. It's a bit gritty, and it's muscular. It's not soupy. It's not mushy. It's not syrupy. And that was very much Papa Hemingway.
So it just in defense. No, rather, that's not in defense, because I'll get in trouble. I don't want to get canceled. You know what I'm talking about? You ever hear
hold
about
on,
that?
I'm just going to turn you off here. Hold on.
Because I was going to say, in defense of the Running the Bulls and in defense of bullfighting, I know that's not maybe okay to say, but I did go to a bullfight in Spain. I was telling my son about this when I was 20. I went to a bullfight, and it was an incredible experience. Yeah, one of those life never forget experiences. A Spanish friend took me to see it, and he knew all about bullfighting. And he and his father had taken him, and he trained, and he was going to be a bullfighter. And he took me to it, and it was like, oh my gosh, it was the most amazing experience, like the crowds. And then they brought the bullfighter out on the shoulders. They opened up the doors of the bullfighting ring at the end, and the crowds carried him out. Rah! And they carried out the bullfighter because he had done such an incredible job. And it was like, wow. It was definitely, as a 20-year-old, it was like mind-bending experience, human experience. And to hear Hemingway, I definitely I would like, what is it, Death in the Afternoon? That's his book about bullfighting. I do want to read it, judge it as bad or good or cruel or anything, but it's just like to observe this activity, that's what some people call an artistic activity of the bullfight is it's maybe worth learning more about, and learn about if it's the cruelest thing in the world, or learn about, but that's aside. It's just like, wow, what is happening in a bullfight, and the running of the bulls too, which is connected to that but different. Where I saw the running of the bulls one year, twice I went to it, and in the year I was there, it was not the day I was there, but the doors to the bull ring, where they run all the bulls all the way down the street, through Pamplona, and all these hundreds of people run with the bulls. It's really the running of the humans. I mean, there's only like 12 bulls, and there's hundreds of people running with bulls. And as they got to the bull ring, somehow the guy who was supposed to keep the door open, somebody clipped the door, and so it closed the door, one of the doors to the bull ring. So there's all these people coming with all these bulls, and they all collide into the door. There's this big pileup of bulls and people and craziness, and I'm like, what are humans doing? And it was wow, that was something else. It was just a nutty day in the running of the bulls in Pamplona, and my thought was, I'm so glad I'm not there in that pile of bulls and people. Anyway, people are nuts. People are nuts.
So if I were to try, without really understanding anything about culture or animals or humans that are animals, without understanding any of that, if I were to attempt to dig a bit, I would say something like a bullfight is some kind of ritualistic, cathartic experience for the people in the audience, where they get to see something killed, but it's not them. It's almost like Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, or what's that movie that people are seeing these days with
Hunger Games?
Hunger Games, exactly. I was going to say with Mr. Snow, and where there's some beast or some heroic person or some symbol that takes all the angst of the day or the week, and and if you happen to be stoned or drinking, as they were in the book The Sun Also Rises, maybe that helps that cathartic process for the lost generation or the found generation or the generation in between. And it somehow lets them release whatever the issues are in their lives. Speaking of which, why did Gertrude Stein and others consider the people after World War I the lost generation? What does that mean?
I think they were lost because they were without, they had, it was definitely a celebratory time, the Roaring 20s. But also, we have to construct meaning again, and once we've seen, that's the way I interpret it, there was this idea that we're making this perfect world, say in the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, we're moving towards some perfect, society and societal, and we've got all these, and then it was all utterly shattered by World War I, and the what do you call them? The pits, the trenches of war, the warfare trenches, and all this, and people trying to construct meaning, and and maybe a bit lost. That's a hard thing to do, to construct meaning, and then let alone what happened, 30 years later, with World War II.
So in that confusion, they doused themselves with alcohol, or these days, I guess it's pot, alcohol, and a number of other things and get lost in the fog.
Perhaps. I think it's how awesome that just reading, who is it? The Power of Myth, Joseph Campbell, who said, like, if you love a writer, or if you go down the path, and I've seen this in my son going down Billy Joel, like learning all this Billy Joel. And like, it's neat to read Hemingway and just read a bunch of his books. And I want to read another one and read another one. And because it gets you, it's inspiring. It makes me like want to take my craft again more seriously, and not again, but to redouble. Like, and that's what he would do. He would write every morning when he was writing. He went through a period where he would just write every morning when he was in Key West, and then he would be free to his kids in the afternoon, but he would write every morning. And I love that kind of, focus on your craft.
I think it was like 7 a.m. till noon every day.
Right.
And he would not take interruptions. His cell phone was not binging.
Right.
It just bing. Oh, let's check the stock market. Or no, I don't think he was like that. He was not multitasking. Is my understanding of his technique as a writer. He took his writing very, very seriously. Ask not for whom the bell tolls. The bell tolls for thee.
Ask not for whom the peach rolls.
Right.
That was one of his lesser known ones.
The peach rolls for thee. Yeah, there's a book that he did not write. We should probably discuss that for a moment. It's called Lolly. It's all about this mushy. It's like eggplant. You ever make eggplant? Like, you have the eggplant, right? And you chop it up and you put it in the oven, and you souffle it, and you saute it, and you puff it and puff it and poof it, and you add like all this mushy stuff like olive oil.
Yeah.
And then you make it all kind of soft and stuff like that. He did not write.
And he didn't write about that.
No. I mean, this is so dangerous to say, the softer edge, the feminine edge. And all of a sudden I'm like thinking, oh my God, I'm going to get attacked when I walk down the streets of Montpelier, Vermont, for having even thought that, not even said that. I don't believe it, but just to have thought that, because it's just not true, because the women I know are like tough as nails, and the guys are soft and mushy in 60s. And
like peaches.
With peaches, exactly. It's fuzzy, like peach fuzz,
Wuzzy Fuzzy was a peach.
Fuzzy Wuzzy went to the beach.
Cuzzy
All
Fuzzy
right, just stop right
beach.
there. You're going to get us both in trouble. So tell me more about this book that Hemingway did not write.
Well, it starts out on the beach in Tacoma.
With the bear canister.
Sonoma, with the bear canister, and ends up with a freeze-dried packet of like a big tub of freeze-dried beef.
My God, that's incredible.
It was. Yeah, it was.
Right. The beef, the freeze-dried beef, when you add water instead, this is my understanding, this is my interpretation of what you're saying. When you add the material to add to it, rather than having like dinner and you take out your spork and your spoon and you eat it, a full-blown bull comes out of it, and it's a very horny kind of thing. Yeah.
Someday you'll have to go to the running of the peaches. It's quite a thrill. They roll them all down the hill. Yeah, it happens in the winter in Pamplona. You have to go sometime.
I had a similar experience with the running with when I came back for the first time in 2004 from India, and I was coming into Canada. I was living up in Canada at the time. And I flew into Dorval Airport, and it was called the running to the first bathroom. And listen, Eric, I know you sometimes run 50 miles in real life.
Yeah.
I get that. Yeah. And I know you've done incredible walks and hikes and just incredible stuff with a pack or without a pack or whatever. And I'm not trying to be hyper masculine or hyper competitive, but I've got you so beat, man. Because when I walked from my seat in that airplane coming back from India, my first trip to India, where I ingested certain things called Indian food and drank and seeped into my pores things called liquids. And when I got from that seat in my airplane on Air Canada or whatever it was and got to the first bathroom, that was way further, dude, than you've ever gone.
Was Mr. Peach waiting there in the stall by any chance?
No, the whole thing was stalled. It was incredible. Yeah, and it took every ounce of courage. It was sort of like facing one of those bulls in Pamplona Beach? Was that what Hemingway's writing about? Mr. Peach leads the way.
He always will. That's what keeps me writing. I've always got that peach out there in front of me and you and all of us. Peach is always there, even when you can't see the peach. It's there. Remember that.
Remember what?
Oh, shit.